And then this was the war medal when the war ended. And this is one the Dutch government gave to Canadians that served to help liberate their country. I went to Sydney and I enlisted there, and they gave me a ticket to Halifax, and I was in Halifax for a while, and then got shipped out to Newmarket, Ontario for training. I was trained for the Armoured Corps in Camp Borden, or in Newmarket for a while, and then went to Camp Borden. Then I was transferred to the infantry, and that's where I took infantry training, and from there they moved us down to Debert, and we were in Debert a little while. There was a ship waiting for us in Halifax, and we went overseas. And of course, there was about 5,000 troops on it at the time. There was only one of them that I knew before, but it didn't take long to get acquainted. Yeah, and one of those fellows that I met, we were still in touch. Yeah, we were in part of the ship way down in the bowels of the ship that wasn't much bigger than this, and there was about 50 of us in there. And we slept on the floors, we slept on tables, and slept on hammocks and that sort of thing. They asked us, well, what regiment would you like to go with? And I put on, my first choice was Cape Breton Highlanders, and my second choice was North Nova Scotia Highlanders. Well, when I went to the continent, then I was moved into the West Nova Scotia Regiment. The ship to start off with, that's where the fears first started, And shortly after we left Halifax, early in the morning, there was a minesweeper torpedoed just outside of Halifax Harbour, just about an hour or so after we went by. You're worried about it. There's always something to worry about. And then when we got to England, there were such things as the V1s were coming to England at that time. And then when we got to Belgium, well, the V2s were falling. We were in Ghent at the time, and there was a lot of them dropped around Ghent. The V1, it was like a doodlebug. It had a high explosive on it. It was unmanned, and it was destined to hit cities and this sort of thing. It wasn't out for any, there was nothing too accurate about it. Well, we'd hear it go by, and, well, if it went by, you're safe. But then you hear it falling shortly after that, because it's meant to hit a city, not necessarily anything, it wasn't that accurate. You get used to it after a while. But it's one of those things you don't want to get used to. Don't want to have to get used to. Well, at night we'd sleep in a slit trench. That was a hole in the ground, it'd be about that deep, and well, maybe about this wide, and it was L-shaped. And this way you're if there's two of us, we're lucky, and we can take turns staying on watch. And the other part of the trench would be covered, perhaps. If there was a house nearby and there was a door on the house, you took the door of that house and you covered this part, and then you covered sods over it and so on for protection, well, at least from small arms and that sort of thing. Well, your buddy would be asleep while you're on guard, and vice versa, If it was a good night, well, you just had to sit and watch. If you saw anything in the line of enemy activity, movement in front of you, the enemy's out there, perhaps 100 yards, 200 yards away, well, if you think they're moving towards you, well, you let them have it. But then on the other hand, maybe it's a good idea to keep quiet, don't shoot. You start shooting, then they'll see where you are, and they can start shooting at you, you know. It was a rifle I had most of the time, but then I'd used to a Sten gun and sometimes a Bren gun. They were machine guns. Well, there you go, chasing the enemy. Of course, there was a certain amount of fear, and there was always a certain amount of hope that the end would come soon and this sort of thing. Yeah. A lot of the time we were walking. Like, for instance, you might leave the front line and you go back and get a rest, maybe 5 miles back. Well, of course, you walked back, and then when you went back again, you'd walk to, of course, 5 miles, that was nothing. It's when you get up into the 20s and 30s, that's when it's a long one. And there's the mobile bath is out there, and the weather's like it is here. And you strip down, and you out in the public too, and you line up and you walk through this shower, and if you're good to the man in front of you, when you scrape the dirt off his back, the fellow coming behind you might scrape the dirt off your back. And that was pretty fast. There was no such thing as a slow walk through that shower. There was somebody there, he didn't exactly have a stick, but he just get moving, and you get pretty close-knit after a while, and whether you really meant to protect your comrade as much as he's trying to protect you, this sort of thing. One thing it did for me, I would say it increased my faith. We were at this place, I could only see perhaps a little beyond where that car is out there, where your car is. And there was 3 of us at this time, 3 of it in this, what we call our section of a platoon. There was our corporal and 2 other fellows besides myself. And I was here, and another fellow was here, and then the fellows for the supper time came, or time to eat, and Corporal Curley came along, and he told this fellow to go and eat. When he would come back, then he would come and tell this fellow to go and eat. And then when he'd come back, he'd come and tell me to go and eat. Now, this fellow had just gone, and there was bushes and trees and the like of the brush we couldn't see behind us. And behind this fellow here, this fellow came out of behind the bushes. He was a soldier. He wasn't wearing his steel helmet, and he shouted. Usually we whispered to each other so the enemy wouldn't hear. And he waved at me like that, and he said, "Hadn't you better go and eat?" Well, I was a little surprised, because I figured, why didn't he ask this fellow? It was his turn. But I grabbed my mess tins and trotted away in high gear. When I got up to where the chuck wagon was, my corporal was there, and he looked at me, and then I thought, well, it was him that was supposed to tell me to go. But I got my mess tin, started gobbling. I was hungry, I'm sure. And then the Germans started to shell. And Curley shouted, "Get to the trenches." And I started off, and I had my mess tins. I didn't want to spill it. I was running, and anyway, I stopped for a while, and I started eating. Then I remembered I left my rifle behind, so I had to go back again, got my rifle. I was waiting behind a concrete foundation of a greenhouse, but I thought, this isn't a good place to be waiting. You know, if one of these, it was mortar bombs that were coming. any of the structures with all this glass around, it'll be worse than ever. So then I made a dash for my trench. When I got my trench, it was blown up by a mortar bomb. And later on I discussed with Curly, he came around later and he saw this and saw what happened. And he was saying, well, he was glad that I didn't wait for him to call me to go to eat. So who was this? I met Curly about a year later after the war, and we discussed it again, and we were no further ahead. There are such things as guardian angels, though. Some people don't believe in that, but I do. They take on different forms. I suppose there's another way of putting it, perhaps. You have to fulfill your purpose in life. So you can't go yet. But when the war ended, we didn't have to walk this time. Got into the trucks and we drove into, our regiment went to The Hague. Others went to the other major cities like Rotterdam, Amsterdam, Utrecht, and they cheered us in and this sort of thing. Yeah. Well, it was like this: how come that I'm here and so many others are not? The war is over with, and if there's any virtue in the victory, how come that we're able to enjoy it, but 45,000 others didn't? 45,000 Canadians didn't. They paid for all this. When the war ended, we didn't hold any animosity towards the German people. And the German soldiers that were shooting at us, that was their job and it was our job. But I discussed with one of them shortly afterwards, well, I guess you're feeling badly about the way things went. Yes, but it would be worse if Hitler had to win this war. So as bad as the destruction of their cities and their loss of lives and so on, it could have been worse. Pray for peace. That's what the world needs. We don't have peace because we don't have enough love in the world. Yeah. Too much jealousy, too much anger, too much faith. But I suppose then after all, we're humans. We're weak human beings. We're so far from being perfect.